Donald, welcome to the podcast. It's been a while since we initially touched base, so we're finally recording something.
That's fantastic. I'm really excited about diving into this space with you, Alex, and thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, well, I think fasting is definitely it's kind of exploded onto the scene, and I think a lot of people are interested in the science and the health benefits around it now. But before we dive into it, are you happy just to maybe sort of share a little bit about you and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm a functional nutritionist and health and wellness coach. I've been in the industry in health and wellness for probably well over a decade now. And I support the Family Health Hub, which is a practice based out in distant Essex. And I'm also supporting businesses and corporates and individual clients, and have been for a good amount of time now. I'm an elite athlete by training, and so performance is one of my real go-tos. But I also now I'm interested in metabolic health, in cognitive performance as much as physical performance. So recovery is a big part of my practice, and also I think type 2 diabetes has been one of my focuses over the past sort of 5 years, simply because of the number of people that I've seen showing up in that space. So that's where I've been. I get to go to lots of events for some strange reason, where I get to learn a great deal about the functional medicine approach. So I'm very keen on that kind of holistic approach, and I know that's something that's close to your heart as well. So we're in the right space.
Yeah. And our topic today, I guess, is sort of around fasting ultimately. And you mentioned off air that maybe one of the good things to cover would be sort of differentiating some of these terms that sometimes get used, I think, a bit interchangeably. So do you think that's a good place to start, just by sort of defining some of these terms that we use?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is, because we're seeing, aren't we, the rise and rise of fasting now. I mean, historically, it's been something was forced upon us in evolutionary biological terms, wasn't it? When we had this feast and famine, when there wasn't much food around, so there was no choice. So people had to go without. But now we have this 24/7 food availability out there, and I think that's put evolutionary pressure on us as a species. And so now we find all sorts of issues around the overconsumption of foods. And so, but now I think people are becoming a little bit more conscious and aware, because of the upswing, perhaps, of chronic diseases that are affecting so many people and conditions. And so, the fasting space is certainly a space that's growing from not just from a societal perspective, but a cultural perspective. So I think that it's something that people have done down through the years for religious or cultural reasons, but now I think it's gathering pace into more into the mainstream. Certainly, we have these terms like intermittent fasting. We hear, don't we? We have, I'm doing a keto approach, or I'm doing a 16-8, or a 12-12, or I'm doing alternate day of 5-2. So, there's lots of these different terms, but I think there are three key things, or three key definitions I want to expound at the very outset. And we've got three really key definitions in terms of fasting. The first one is kind of the common definition, if you will. So the common definition is perhaps where we have the abstinence of food or water for a period of time. And then we have perhaps the physiological definition, which is where we see free fatty acids being mobilized for food. And this is a new fatty acid pathway in the body being used for fuel rather than glucose. So this is the physiological aspect of fasting, where we have the transition from using glucose or sugar for fuel, and we're using fat for fuel. And then we have a molecular definition. So this is the exciting one that we'll spend a little bit of time talking about, I think, where we have what Professor Walter Longo and his research team, is the founder of the fasting mimicking diet approach, that has come across. And this is the absence of, or the downregulation of, nutrient sensing pathways. So these nutrient sensing pathways are these pathways that sense the presence of food. And if you can downregulate these pathways, then you can bring about a molecular impact on, or a multi-systems impact on every cell in the body. So there we have the three definitions of for you, and I think it's useful for people to say, oh, well, where does a prolonged fast or a 5-day fast or a water-based fast fit into these spaces? So maybe we'll come on to that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I guess what you're saying there is there could be a stark difference between how we approach those definitions, whether we're kind of doing a water fast or kind of nothing's going in through the mouth compared to down regulating some of those molecular pathways. How that looks is going to be quite different, I imagine.
Yes, and again, I think looking a little bit deeper into in terms of the particular programs or diet regimes that people are using out there, you've got time restricted eating, a TRE approach, which is we've got less than 2 days, and then you've got prolonged fasting, let's say. So we'll split it down the middle. So on one side you've got less than a couple of days, and that might be a 5 to 2 program. It might be an alternate day fasting program, or it might be a time restricted eating pattern. So you're fasting overnight, and then you're starting your feed at 10-11 o'clock, but you fasted for 12 hours, and you can extend that window. But those are shorter term. And then on the other flip side, then we have a more prolonged fast. It might be water based, or it might be fasting with food over 5 days or a prolonged period of time. So one's going to have a molecular effect, the others may have an effect, but it won't have the full impact of an extended fast, let's say. So that's kind of where the different fasting approaches, I think, are interesting areas to explore.
And you mentioned sort of the mobilization of free fatty acids as a source of foods that is sort of, I guess, one of the mechanisms in that second definition. What sort of time periods are we talking about when that starts to kick in?
Well, there's we know, maybe as practitioners and even as lay people will know, that if you've got a reserve of energy in your body, you've got it in your muscles, so you've got muscle glycogen short term, and then you've got liver glycogen. So these are our energy stores. Those last for a limited space of time, maybe a day, maybe. And then after that, the body's going to be all thinking, if we don't have anything for a day, the body's going to say, hello, anything? Is there anything more coming in? Because I'm looking for some fuel here for energy. So after a day or so, then fats are going to start to get mobilized. So that's where the free fatty acids will come from. They'll come from adipose tissue or extra fat that may be gathering on the body, and that fat will be utilized for energy. If it goes into a couple of days, then the body will then say, oh, I'm not getting very much at all, am I, after a couple of days? Now I need to really start ramping up the production of beta hydroxybutyrate, which is known as the ketone production system, or ketosis. So that's kind of when the fats come into play, and that's why we see with prolonged fasting, we see fat loss, which is exciting for some people who are looking for that. So that's the kind of a little bit of background around how fats get mobilized, or lipolysis, or that kind of production of or use of that substrate for fuel, if you will.
Oh, okay, that's helpful. So I guess, you mentioned earlier that there's been this sort of rise of fasting and these terms and these practices. And I guess the question that naturally comes up is sort of why? And I guess what I'm sort of implying into that is, what are we starting to understand in regards to some of these mechanisms and health benefits associated with fasting?
Well, I think one of the key things that people are looking for, Alex, is lifespan and longevity, anti-aging type of ideas around, oh, how can I age well? And Professor Walter Longo who is the creator of the fasting mimicking diet approach, his research really was based 20 years of research, which was based really on how do organisms live for a long period of time? How do we, as the centenarians, how do these people live in these particular regions in the blue zones? How are they living to 120, and they're living well? So their lifespan is not affected by type 2 diabetes or inflammatory conditions or large amounts of oxidative stress, for example. And they're showing up in good health for a good number of years. So he was really interested in looking at organisms and lifespan and these nutrient sensing pathways. So his research team were really focused on these three key nutrient sensing pathways, and the master switch that he was really tuning into was IGF-1, which is insulin-like growth factor 1. So this is one of those key nutrient sensing pathways. There are a couple of others, which is mTOR, which is that mammalian target rapamycin, which is an amino acids pathway, and then you've got protein kinase alpha, PKA, which is this carbohydrate pathway. All these things sense food in the system or in the ecosystem. If we can inhibit, let's step back. If we're having constantly eating all the time, we're upregulating cellular growth. We're accelerating our aging and our growth, and we might want to do that for a certain period of time when we reach a certain age. But after that stage, we don't want to grow anymore, really. What we want to be doing is renewing. And that's so the whole process of mitochondrial health is an interesting area. And I think that from a growing and a cellular aging perspective, you don't want to have high levels of insulin-like growth factor for a long time. Otherwise, you'll be accelerating your aging. So there's a lot of interest in your biological age, isn't there? So what is our biological age? And Dr. Mark Hyman talks about this, is how can I, he's really tuning into his biological age at the moment. He's got his chronological age, which is in his 60s. And he says, well, my biological age is actually in my 40s. Now, I actually did a test of myself in that particular area after doing, a certain fasting regime. So, but we'll circle back on that, I think. But I think in essence, what we're really interested in is dialing back on accelerated aging and doing some rejuvenation and cellular repair work, which can only occur if we dial down these nutrient sensing pathways periodically. So the whole aspect of doing a periodic fast is actually probably quite useful because you can do some cellular repair work. Your mitochondrial health will improve because you're generating new, younger cells because you're getting rid of old, dead cells effectively. So that's the area of research is really exciting, because if you're accumulating cellular damage, then you're going to have the onset of certain conditions, right, which are inflammatory conditions. And we know the root cause of many chronic diseases, whether it be type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, these sorts of diseases are predicated through inflammation, right?
Yeah.
So if we can, so there are all sorts of research studies that are going on in these specific areas with prolonged fasting and the fasting mimic diet right now, which is showing some very, very promising results.
Interesting. So yeah, I guess that's sort of a nice segue into maybe your personal experience, which you started to touch on there from when you're looking at your chronological and biological age, but also for our practitioners listening, and I guess the public actually as well. What are some of the clinical things that we're seeing? Why might we consider these diets apart from maybe just from an aging perspective? Are there other scenarios where these come into play? And yeah, just kind of exploring, I guess, some of that clinical experience.
Well, I think one of the key things is that with fasting, it doesn't. It's quite different in terms of how it shows up. And Professor Walter Longo talks about this. He says, listen, it's not like a single supplement or a single compound, like a drug, which targets a particular area or organ or system in the body. This is a really key, I think, learning in terms of how a prolonged fast might work. It works in a coordinated fashion. It works on an intracellular level on every cell in the body. Oh, wow. So if he's dealing with all the mitochondria, then we're actually dealing with our DNA, because we're dealing with the mitochondria, right? So if we can get rid of misfolded proteins, organelles that aren't working correctly, intracellular bacteria, this is where the whole aspect of autophagy or autophagy comes in. So this is a key term, and it was discovered back in 2016, or the research behind it was discovered by a Japanese researcher back in 2016. He won the Nobel Prize for a discovery of this particular area of health. And this aspect of autophagy is something that is like self-eating, is how it's literally interpreted. So we'll get autophagy coming in on around about day 3 of a prolonged 5-day fast. Okay. So this is something that happens after ketosis kicks in around about day 2 or 3. Then we have this cellular renewal area of research. Well, what's happening? Well, autophagy is happening. So your cells are getting cleaned up. These, as we say, the intracellular misfolded proteins, the bacteria, things that aren't working correctly get cleaned out because the body induces a positive stress resistance on the cells. So this stress resistance is something that is where a lot of research is focused now. How can we upregulate parasympathetic tone in the body, which is rest and digest, when repair work gets done? How often do we do that in a lifetime, Alex? You know, if we're showing up at the age of, 30, 40, 50 years of age, when perhaps the onset of certain conditions might come into play, well, if we can, at that life stage, begin to think about renewing some things, probably a good time. Now, any time's a good time, really, isn't it, Alex? But if we're now have this new awareness, this new understanding about the safety around this particular fasting regime, rather than it being a harsh, let's say, water-based fast, where there are some issues around adherence and safety. So making a distinction between the two. I'm not saying that water-based fasting is not useful, but there are some issues around it, and 90% of people who try it give up after the first day, right, because it's so hard. But with a fasting mimicking diet, what Walter Longo's team has found is that we can mimic a water-based fast, but we can sneak in some nourishment for the body so that it had a higher degree of compliance and a higher degree of safety, so we don't have issues around gallstones, dehydration, hypoglycemia, hypertension. Those sorts of things don't show up, and that's what the research shows us, that those sorts of cardiometabolic markers are improved. Then it's a win-win scenario, because look, it's going to benefit our health, but the side effects, there aren't the side effects that might come with a prescriptive type of approach.
Right. Yeah. And I think, with the sort of things like the water fasts, I imagine there's such a big psycho-emotional component to it. I mean, I saw a post by Dr. Karazian the other day talking about how people, when they're going through maybe an autoimmune protocol type diet and they're removing certain foods to see if it could be a trigger, but again, we start to learn more about our relationship with food, and that, I guess, goes very deep. So it's just another reason why compliance, I guess, on some of these extended water fasts can be so challenging.
Absolutely. And I think you're looking for clinical oversight in those sorts of areas where people, there's certain other fast booking fasts and other fluid-based fasts, which really require, the attention of a skilled practitioner.
Yeah.
People can try it. Look, I tried it without any supervision myself in trying to do a 3-day water-based fast. It was tough, really tough. I'm quite a disciplined person, and I have capacity, let's say. But I found it super tough, and I found the transition actually quite tough. So, I mean, we haven't spoken about transition, but I think that is something that certainly comes into play when you're doing any regime, whether it be elimination for a particular type of approach. So paying attention to how you transist is actually quite an important component. But I think that the overriding narrative here is about safety. Certain approaches are not always useful for everybody, are they? So this aspect of personalization is super important. So circling back to my own clinical experience, I hadn't come across prolonged fasting or fasting mimicking diets. Yes, I tried skipping breakfast, and I tried, the time restricted eating type of approach. I was curious, and I think that's always a good place to be as a practitioner, because you're going to learn something. So I certainly, when I came across the fasting mimicking diet, I thought, oh, how can you mimic fasting or get the same response as a water-based fast when you're having food? Because surely you won't go into ketosis. You'll have too much sugar in your body. So I was kind of skeptical about that. So I tried this particular product, which was called Prolon, this fasting mimicking diet, and I learned something. So that whole psychosocial and also the kind of emotional connection with food, I'd always use food for performance. And I think anyone who's showing up in this space, or any of your listeners who can relate to that, or I must have more protein for recovery, or I need to a carbo load because I'm doing a marathon, or whatever it is, there's always something, or I need to lose some weight, so I can't have carbs, or whatever it is. So we've always got this macro or micro conversation going on in our own heads based upon how we're feeling, or our peers, or I've got to show up for this wedding, whatever it is, this goal. So I went into it with an open mind, and I found out some things about my own connection with food. And one of the two key learnings, and one was around hydration, and the other was around caffeine intake, and actually the third one was around portion control. So those were really three key learnings. I think that's something I'd like to share practically with practitioners, is that if you're going to try something, you want to keep a journal and find out how it's impacting you, because you'll want to be able to describe that journey. So I did 3 successive cycles of this 5-day fasting regime with 25 days in between. All right. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to do what Professor Longo did in his research study. I'm going to do the homework for me and see what shows up. So I measured all I had my bloods taken. I did biomarkers. I looked at cholesterol, fasting insulin, C-reactive protein, the inflammatory marker, insulin-like growth factor, all the things that were measured in his research. And my results mirrored everything that they found in this randomized controlled trial of 100 human subjects. And I thought, wow, this stuff really works. So this was over 90 days. Fast forward another 90 days, 60 days later, and I've lost 3 inches around my waist. Really? So for me, I found that it had a, quite profound impact systemically on me, and it made me realize that actually I don't need that much food to function over the course of 5 days, because I was having this nourishment. It was a reduced intake, but my cognitive performance, my sleep pattern improved after I did the second cycle. I found that I had more energy over a longer period of time. And also there was a few reductions around the middle. Not that I needed to lose or was looking for weight loss, but what it did, it sharpened up my adipose, or my body composition. So my body composition changed in a positive way. And I think my cognitive and neuroplasticity changed because I had a plant-based, gluten-free, lactose-free 5-day window where the body was doing this repair work, and I had this autophagy cleanup happening. And so I deployed that in my practice. And guess what? The same kind of results showed up in my clients. So then I thought, this really works. People are really benefiting. I had people with who were type 2 diabetic, who brought their HbA1c down from over 100 down to 53 in the space of 5 months. And I'm thinking, wow, this really has got some clinical application. And so, those are some of the results that I'm just sharing with you on a personal level.
Yeah.
But I've seen it mirrored in other practitioners that I get to talk to. So I think it's quite exciting. It's an exciting space to be occupying and develop and finding that space for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so, do you think that, Donald, that sort of those 5-day periods that you were doing 25 days apart, there was a longer term impact from also a behavioral perspective? So you mentioned sort of portion sizes and sort of your relationship. So it wasn't just that there were health benefits from doing these 3 times 5-day fasting mimicking diets, but actually just there were longer term patterns that shifted.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that was, and as I mentioned, that was one of my key learnings. I was thinking, well, because of my particular training regime, and if I was teaching classes, or I'd been, getting home late and eating late and having a large dinner late on in the day, which is very commonplace, isn't it? I think my behavior changed. I no longer do that. Yes, my training regime has shifted and changed anyway, but as a practice and as a behavior and as a habit, I find that I'm much better rested because I have that metabolic rest, and it allows me to do my repair work overnight, and I lean into that 12-hour fast, and I can show up in better shape. And that, I think that was a big behavior change for me. And I saw that change also mirrored in my clients that I was working with. And I think that practice is something that has shaped me as an individual, as a practitioner, and also the people that show up in my practice space in a beneficial way. So as a behavioral change tool, absolutely, because people, I think, are unaware very often of the amount and the macronutrient or micronutrient components of what's on the plate. And there's or snacking in between. I think Dr. Jason Fung talks about this in his Obesity Code book, which is a super book. Many people have probably read that, and he says, listen, we've got to really come away from the encouragement of this insidious snacking as it goes on. Oh, I just have a little snack to tide me over.
Yeah.
You say, well, they're going to spike insulin. That's a fat storing hormone. Why would you be doing that, particularly if you're borderline or type 2 diabetic even? So he talks about fasting quite extensively in his practice and in his podcast space. And that's something I learned when I went to one of his particular workshops. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because as a practitioner, I was taught a slightly different way in terms of managing blood sugar. So I think there's new learning coming through, Alex, isn't there, about leaving space, having that mindfulness around our composition of what's on the plate, and also this kind of, need or not for snacking in between meals.
Yeah. And there's so many different reasons, I think, to consider that removal of the snack. Thinking around, obviously, doing a lot of work in sort of the SIBO space, and a lot of our customers coming to us with SIBO, trying to make sure there's plenty of room and time between meals for that migratory motor complex to kick in and to support gut health as well. So it's interesting that, there's more than one reason why we really want to do this. And I'm really glad you mentioned the whole resilience piece around this, because I mean, I've mentioned a few times, but I think the paper that I stumbled across a few years ago now that really kind of opened my eyes to the concept of resiliency, kind of it really gave a clear message that from an evolutionary perspective, as you said, we were forced into fasting. We had to be physically active. We were exposed to sunshine. We did eat plant-based compounds, and they all have that kind of up-regulating response in regards to certain cellular pathways. So it's something that I feel like we almost have to do now. It's like we do fasting rather than it was just part of our existence.
Yeah, and look, it's almost, isn't it curious, Alex? This is it's curious to me that now it probably is being forced upon us, and for a very good reason. From an evolutionary biology perspective, we need it. We've lost touch with it, but now I think there's very much a gravitas towards it in a positive sense. From a sustainability perspective as much as anything else, right? The resources that we have, look, we need to care for it, and we need to care for ourselves in a similar way. So I think how we show up emotionally, how we feed ourselves, is it through food, and if so, is it in the right at the right time, and is it in the right way? And from a resilience perspective, are we embedding resilience in our mitochondria, in our DNA, in our whole neural plasticity, or are we driving the truck down the road towards the mitochondrial destruction? So I think that we need to be changing. If it's not forced upon us, how are we going to embrace it? So I think that practitioners like you and the Health Path group and the whole holistic space is one that's now getting noticed more, I think, in mainstream. So I think that can only be a good thing, because the health of the nation and the world depends upon this kind of mindful behavior around how we show up within the food space.
Yeah, I'm mindful that there are going to be some listeners that aren't at all familiar with the fasting mimicking diet. So are we able just to kind of touch on what that sort of looks like?
Yeah, look, it's a structured meal plan. It comes in a big box, and there are 5 smaller boxes inside it. And effectively, everything that you need to eat is in each individual box. So 5 boxes. Day 1, you have about 1,100 calories. Day 2 to 5, you have about 750. It's a combination of plant-based olives, soups, snack bars, herbal teas, a multivitamin, an essential fatty acid capsule, which is a little algal oil capsule, essential fat capsule. And it's very simple. Is it easy? That depends. I like to prepare people for it, to say, make sure beforehand that you are in a place where you're not going to be too busy. You're not going to be going to the gym and doing your HIIT classes or running marathons while you're doing your 5-day fast. So the preparation is important. A little withdrawal, because there's no caffeine in this program. Okay. So it's a structured meal plan with everything, all the components in each individual box, and you consume each and everything for your lunch, for your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you stay well hydrated, of course. So you can have unlimited amount of decaffeinated or herbal sort of herbal teas like peppermint and chamomile, those sorts of calming things, and you can do it 3 successive cycles if you wanted to, but you could do it twice a year. You could do it 4 times a year. It really depends on, the practitioner like yourself. Alice, you would say, well, Jane, this is how I think it might work for you. it looks as though, you know, your visceral, we've got visceral fat here, your body composition, you're looking for a little bit of fat loss or weight loss here. We can do that over the next 90 days, and we'll do 5 a day fast twice over the next couple of months. And so, yeah, structured meal plan, everything comes in the with guidance in a box, and then you consume everything within 5 days. There is another product if you can't do 5 days, which is a 1-day fast, just to test it. So I'll just make mention of that. So there is something called a reset, and that's using the same micro precision, but you just get to fast for a day. So it's just 750 calories. You don't have to think about it. And that, I think, is one of the key things, Alex. I think we talked about the psychosocial concept and the emotional concept. I think that or practitioners, we spend a lot of time thinking, working things out. How many micros? How many macros? Oh, I've got the right minerals and vitamins. All that research has been done for you. Everything is very carefully prescribed. It's micro precision. It uses Nutri-technology. The safety is really good. The anecdotal results are good, and the clinical research behind it is even better. So, you know, it takes the guesswork out. So for me, it's an easy option to put in front of somebody if they're thinking, oh, I don't know, and what if and what up. Well, try it out and see.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So can you just expand on sort of, I guess, the science and the sort of concepts behind the pathways? So, you know, the name is self-explanatory now, and you've shared around the fasting mimicking diet. So we're eating on that first day, for example, I think you said 1100 calories.
Yeah.
And yet we're triggering some of those protective cellular pathways like autophagy, for example, while still eating. So what's kind of going on there?
Well, I think that with the micro precision that's gone on, what Walter Longo's team has worked out is that it needs to be a certain ratio. So the ratio of nutrients is super, super important. So what do we want? We're wanting fat for fuel, effectively. We want to be generating free fatty acids. And when we haven't got enough of them, we'll give you some. So it's a 45% ratio, 45, 45, 10, 45% healthy fats, 45% complex carbohydrate, and 10% protein, so low protein. So let's circle back to these nutrient sensing pathways. Insulin-like growth factor. That's the protein pathway. We're down-regulating it because we don't want to be anabolic. We don't want to be growing. We want to be doing what? Rejuvenating, cellular cleanup. So that's why the protein is only down at 10%. Okay. And then the complex carbohydrate, there is a little bit of sugar in there in the nut bars, a little bit of honey, about 8 grams. But it's emulsified with the fibers and the fats and the protein. So we know that that blunts the blood sugar response. So here we're influencing glucose, insulin sensitivity. So the PKA, which is protein kinase alpha, the carbohydrate pathway, down regulating it, so we're getting a better insulin response, better glucose, blood glucose response. Insulin-like growth factor, protein pathway, low protein, so we're influencing that pathway. mTOR, the amino acid pathway, we're getting a sparing of protein because ketones are showing up. So we've got this ketosis coming in around about day 3. So this cellular cleanup is happening, and that's why it's prolonged over 5 days. Walter's worked out is quite a time period. They've tried longer periods, they've tried shorter periods, but they found that this 5 days is where the real you get the best efficacy and compliance. So it makes sense, right? Not too long, but just the right amount of time. So what we're doing is we have this stress resistance, which is induced by these nutrient sensing pathways being inhibited. We haven't got too much food coming in. We've got just the right amount and in the right ratio. So I think the ratio is what I'm speaking to here in terms of not triggering or inhibiting those nutrient sensing pathways. And we find that this master switch, this insulin-like growth factor, influences other compounds. I haven't we probably haven't got time to get into those compounds, but you've got FOXO and P13K and all these other compounds. These are actually upregulate antioxidants in the body, or can, FOXO, for example. So this stress resistance, it means that we're influencing parasympathetic tone. So this period of 5 days is not completely devoted to, but largely devoted to cellular cleanup. And the body says, oh, right, I've got a switch. So we've got a metabolic switch going on. We're influencing key hormones in the body, of which insulin is just one. And we see this stress resistance where we're able to influence the microbiome and also the immunological and neurological response, because ketones are fueling the brain, super efficient. That's why on day 4, people are reporting this, oh, I felt so clear in my mind. So no brain fog gone. And I got this energy, because you're not overfeeding the system. What you're doing, and we know, don't we, that food is information. We haven't got an overload of information. We've got this kind of just the right amount that we can process, and we can do some kind of cool stuff with at a mitochondrial, a cellular level. So this cellular rejuvenation kicks in by virtue of the downregulation of these specific key nutrient sensing pathways. It's the carbohydrate, protein, and amino acid pathways. So one of the things they have found, and the question I always get asked is, what about caffeine? What about coffee? I can't do without my coffee, right? So more than 90 grams stimulates protein kinase alpha, they found.
Interesting.
So I think that's a kind of interesting feature to talk about. So, if you can have just a little bit of coffee, yeah, you can get by with that. I found that when I did it, I didn't drink coffee very much when I was doing my 5-day fast, but I did have a lot of green tea prior to that. And I found I got a little bit withdrawal headaches. I made an adjustment by including more electrolytes and more herbal teas. So the shift is very much a personalized approach. Some people are more caffeine sensitive than others, as we know. Some more gluten sensitive, or whatever it might be. So I think personalization is where we need to have our focus as well.
Brilliant. No, I hope that gives people a nice sense of what to expect ultimately.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of time, Donald, but is there anything that you would like to sort of conclude with? Anything that we haven't touched on yet that is important too, do you think?
I think that there are some exciting new products that are entering this longevity space, which will be available to practitioners, and if there's some training that you want to make available to your audience, then we can make that happen, because this research is evolving all the time. There's a lot of interest in fasting mimicking diet around oncology, and using it as alongside as an adjunctive therapy alongside the chemotherapy, with great degree of success. And I'm going to share with you the papers on that, the scientific papers, because I think you'll value those, and you'll be able to share those amongst your practitioner base. So happy to do that.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that would be really popular and well received. As you said, it is a big area, and the science is getting bigger and bigger in regards to all the health benefits here, as you've been sharing. So Donald, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to learn a little bit more. I think when often people are surprised that I haven't done more fasting and experimented with these things, but I'm definitely, I think, in a place where I'm more intrigued and wanting to. So I'm looking forward to potentially sharing some experiences in the future around this.
Yeah, look, we're going to get something out to you, so you're going to be able to have your own journey. And I think I'd encourage people to explore that journey and see what that fasting journey looks like. You can do it with a mimicking approach, and it's a good approach to get you out of the blocks with.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Donald. It's been a pleasure.
And you, thank you.